But we want to actually help you to understand a little bit of what's happening in the rest of the world, not only in Australia. And what's happening in the rest of the world, this is not something new that has been happening in the last 12 or 18 months. It's been going on for a long, long time, but it's becoming into more conscious space in the Western world. So I've got a question to ask you. And the question is, who wants to be a millionaire? And I want you to answer it in two ways. First, I want you to say yes or no, I want to be a millionaire. But then the second thing is, I want you to write quickly how you think you're going to get to your first million. If you'd asked me how I thought being a millionaire would look, it would be that I would have $1 million sitting in the bank and I could do with it whatever I wanted. And that's what I would think of as being a millionaire. The interesting thing is that a lot of you don't see yourself as millionaires already. And yet, what we know is that you are already well on the way to being a millionaire. If you're between the age of 13 and 18, which is what most high school students are, then you're close to being halfway to being a millionaire. And I want to put that into a little bit of perspective. So what we know is that around about $250,000 to $500,000 is what it costs to bring up a child from 0 to 18. If we go and look at some of the statistics. But what most people don't consider is that the large portion of that has gone into investing in your education. And one of the most important assets that you have is your education. Now, because we're looking at education this morning, I want to throw a couple of definitions. Our first definition is investment. Investment's putting money or energy into an item or person and hoping for a return. The second definition is profit, which is a business underlying factor to make something. Usually we think of it as money from work. Our next definition is what a business is, and it's a way to buy low or invest and to sell high and gain a return. It's to make a profit, basically. And our final definition, and I promise that this is as close as we get to playing school this morning, is to gain or to have a gain return, which means basically to get back the money that you invest or to get back the energy that you've invested in something. So that's the end of our schooling. But I want you to look at those definitions just briefly. And to me, it's very obvious. And I'm a bit older than most of you, unfortunately, but it's pretty obvious to me that one of the best investments that we can make today is not shares, it's not housing or property, it's not cryptocurrency, it's not even anything to do with a financial platform, but one of the best investments that we can make is educating, and particularly educating children. And it's a passion of mine to educate children. And that's why I have focused some of my charity work too, is educating children. I want to start to break down what I'm talking about with education so that you can start to have a look at what it means to be an educator and be an influencer. Now, just before we do that, I have another page of statistics. If we take that $250,000 that your parents have invested into you, and we look at, I've listed 15 countries there from around the world, from various continents. And we're going to compare your $250,000 in value to those countries. And what you can see is that $250,000 actually equates to multiple $1 million in other currencies. So in Myanmar, you're worth about 300 million kyat, I think it is. In the country where I visit, which is Nepal, you would be worth, I think it's about 21 million rupees. So that 250,000 Australian, compared to people across the rest of the world, makes you a multi-millionaire. So you're not a millionaire in the making, you're actually a multi-millionaire already. But what does that mean? What does that mean to you today to be a multimillionaire? And what is the profit or gain return that you get from being a multimillionaire? And to introduce this, I want to tell you a story. This is an old story, but I've made it into a modern context. So there was an entrepreneur. So many of you will know what an entrepreneur is. Some of you will have heard of Elon Musk. He's an entrepreneur. He's trying to do multiple different things all at the same time and makes a lot of money and invests in a lot of things. So we have our entrepreneur, and our entrepreneur, because he was very conscious of his health and of his influence in life, decided that he was going to stop work for a year and he was going to spend some recreation time with his families. And then he brings in his 3 most trusted employees. And the first trusted employee's name is Anisha. And just for your interest, Anisha means never ending. And he says to his Anisha, I'm going away for a year. I'm taking a year outside of the business. I'm going to be offline. You won't be able to contact me. I'm going to give you $5 million of my business, and I want you to look after it. The entrepreneur then talks to his second employee, and her name happens to be Amalia. And he says to Amalia the same thing, I'm going away for a year, and he gives her $2 million that he wants her to look after. And then finally, the third employee is Amy. Amy means beloved, and Amy is given $1 million. And the entrepreneur heads off on his holiday or whatever he's going to do for the year. You can imagine whatever you like that he's doing in that year. The entrepreneur actually stayed away much longer than 1 year. We might say that it was 2 years or 4 years. It might have even been 5 years. But when he comes back, he calls his 3 employees together again. And he says to them, I want to do an audit of your books and I want to see what you've been doing while I'm away. So he calls Anisha in and he has a look at her books. And he asks her what she's been doing. And Anisha says, you gave me $5 million. And while you've been away, I've turned it into $10 million. And as he audits the books, he finds out that she is exactly correct. And he says to her, well done, Anisha. You have worked really hard. You have used my money wisely. Thank you for your contribution and your effort. And then he turns to Amelia and he asks the same question. What have you been doing? And he audits the books and he has a look at them. And she says, you gave me $2 million and now I've got $4 million for you. And he says, well done, Amelia. Thank you for your contribution. You've been a faithful worker. And finally, he turns to Amy. And Amy has a really worried look on her face. In fact, it's not worry, it's anxious. And Amy says, when you gave me that $1 million, I thought long and hard about what I was going to do with that $1 million. And I know that you are really careful with your investments. And I was afraid that I might put that money in something and I would lose it. And so what I did is that I researched a lot and I found the best, safest safety deposit box company, and I put that money in that safe deposit box so that I would make sure that it was safe when you got home. And so here's your $1 million back again. And the entrepreneur turns to Amy and he said, Amy, I am really disappointed in you. Even though you know that I am careful with my investments, and even though you know that I value the money that I have, what I also value is that people will see the values that I have given them and put them into practice. And so unfortunately, because the way that you've handled my money, I'm going to have to let you go. And he takes the money from Amy and he gives it to Anisha. And you can read this story in the book of Matthew in the Bible. Jesus actually tells this story as a parable to illustrate to people about their value to society. And one of the final summations of this, Jesus actually says these words. He says, for everyone who has, we're going to give a whole lot more and you're going to get it in abundance. But for those that don't have, what they do have will be taken away. Now, I want to have a look at this story from your perspective, because each and every one of us is basically one of these employees. We have been given an asset and we have been invested in. And for us, in the Western world anyway, that asset that we get is education. And what the entrepreneur did, he didn't make them employees for the time that he was away. He actually made them entrepreneurs like himself. And he gave them the opportunity to go and do something with the asset that he had given them. He invested in them as a person as well as giving them money. And so today, I want you to start thinking about yourself as being a multi-millionaire and how you are going to start to invest what you have in the assets that you have. And before I go any further, what I want to do is to make a little prediction. And this little prediction is that some of you that are listening today are going to take the asset of education that you've had or that you've got, and you're going to use that asset and you're going to become wealthy. You're going to get lots and lots of money. There are some of you that are going to use that same investment, that same asset, and you're going to make yourself a reasonable amount of money, but you're going to be comfortable in life. But unfortunately, there are some of you, and I hope that it's none of you that I'm talking to, but unfortunately, there are some people who are going to take the asset that they've got and they're not going to use it, or they're going to use it poorly. And in life, they're going to struggle, they're going to suffer. They may become unemployed, they may become bankrupt. The important thing is that they will still have their asset if they recognize that they still have it. Whichever one you are is not going to change the fact that because you have been given this asset, you now have a responsibility to use it. And what I want to look at this very briefly in closing is how we can use it. With a small investment, I was able to educate a young boy in Nepal. And as a result of that, he was able to start a human trafficking rescue program. All of you are global citizens. And what I want you to do is to write down in the chat how many countries you've visited. And also, if you've lived in another country, how many countries you've lived in. And what we're going to see without too much analysis is that between the teachers and the students, we've probably visited most continents of the earth. And probably what we're also going to find out is that we've probably visited or lived in close to 50% of the nations on earth. As global citizens and as millionaires, we are responsible for our area of influence, but we're also responsible for what we do. Every year, each one of you is becoming more and more important to corporations, and corporations are spending billions of dollars researching what you do. They are looking at what your area of influence is. They're looking at what you eat, what you drink. They're looking at what websites you visit, what social media you interact with. They're looking at what you do for hobbies and what you have, what sports you do. And for those of you that are employed, they'll also look at your employment history. And the reason they're doing this is because they recognize that teenagers are going to spend more money in the economy than anyone else currently living on Earth at this point. And so that's where they're investing their money. And it's your responsibility as multi-millionaires to start making good decisions. Every time you eat something, someone has had to prepare that food. That person that's prepared the food is effectively your employee. Every piece of clothing that you put on has been manufactured by someone, and you are employing that person. But what I want you to think about today is that your choices are determining what happens to people that work underneath you. As a student, you don't see yourself as an employer, but you are a multi-million-dollar employer. You are employing people to make your clothes, to make your food, to manufacture goods that you use, to produce the shows that you watch. And so it is extremely important that you start to recognize that the conditions that you would like to work under as a millionaire are the same conditions that you are going to allow others to work under. I want to briefly walk you through what happens in the Western world to get you from being a Western consumer to how we have slaves. And this is what happens. You want to buy goods and services. You want to buy them at the best price. You want value for money. And so the producers, the manufacturers, try to find ways of producing that as cheap as they can so that they can still make a profit. And in that process, what happens is that they are going to employ people at as cheaper rate that they can, and they'll actually change countries if they think they can do it cheaper. And eventually there'll be exploitation and there'll be abuse and slavery. And it's our responsibility as multi-million-dollar global citizens to start thinking about how we can make changes to our lifestyle, how we can minimize modern slavery. But my hope today is that all of you are going to prosper, and that your influence is going to help others prosper around you, but also it's going to help others in other countries prosper because you're aware that your decisions are going to better their lives as well as yours.
Talk about a message. That was absolutely amazing. I feel so good and inspired, and I want to go ahead and share that with someone else. How about you guys like and subscribe and check out some of the other videos that we have to share.